could see a lot of other hosts and property managers generally in Facebook groups asking the same questions over and over again. How much do I charge? Should I charge a cleaning fee? Should I allow pets? I thought there really needs to be a platform to help people. Actually, what I wasn't really prepared for at the start is the constant highs and lows. I was really bad at dealing with minor setbacks at the start. You know, if somebody replied to me over LinkedIn and just said they weren't interested, I'd get really annoyed about that. Now it would be completely water off a duck's back. Everybody's aiming their content at trying to get the enterprise level clients, 50, 100, 200 properties that they're managing. And that's a really, really small part of the industry. 80% of the industry is people with 1 or 2 properties. The vast majority of people involved in short-term rentals were being ignored. One thing that I saw early on, and especially when I was going to events in the STR space, and from what I could see in the content that was being created, is that
property management at scale is about more than just rent rolls and maintenance calls. It's about protecting your assets, delivering stellar guest experiences, and scaling operations without losing quality. Welcome to Minute by Minute, the show where industry leaders share unfiltered stories, proven strategies, and real solutions for operating at scale. I'm your host, Nils Mattisson, CEO of Minut, and together we will dive deep into what it really takes to keep your properties safe, efficient, and protected. Let's get started. Today I'm joined by James Varley, founder and CEO of HostPlanet, one of the fastest growing media and education platforms in the short-term rental industry. James has built HostPlanet into a hub for hosts, property managers, and industry professionals looking for practical, high-quality insights through podcasts, newsletters, ebooks, and events. What makes James particularly interesting is that he sits on both sides of the lens. He's a media operator shaping industry conversation, but he's also a hands-on holiday rental manager in Yorkshire. Before entering the STR world, James spent a decade leading communications for the FIFA World Cup in Qatar 2022, giving him rare experience in global storytelling, content strategy, and organizational comms at scale. In this conversation, we'll explore why education has become such a critical lever in professionalizing the STR industry, what James is seeing from the front lines of media and operator communities, and where he believes the sector is heading next. James, welcome to Minute by Minute. It's great to have you here.
great to be on the show. How are you doing, Niels?
I'm doing great. Let's kick off with your journey. You went from corporate comms at the World Cup to building HostPlanet. What sparked the shift into short-term rentals?
Well, I ended up with a couple of short-term rentals myself, and from being a host, I found that a lot of hosts were lacking the help that they needed through media channels. I'll back up. So yeah, as you rightly say, I spent 10 years in Qatar working in corporate communications for the World Cup organizing committee. And while I was there, I ended up getting a short-term rental. The reason for this was because I was traveling back to the UK quite often at the time, and I needed a place to stay. I got sick of staying with family, and family got sick of me being around. So I thought I need my own space. And the only way that I could kind of block the time off and use the property when I wanted to was to have it as a holiday let, as we call it in the UK, or short-term rental or vacation rental, depending on where you are. So I got a holiday let, and my thinking was, well, so long as this property pays the bills and pays the mortgage while I'm in Qatar, then I'm happy. If I've got a pad that I can use whenever I need to 3 or 4 times a year, then I'm happy with that. So I put it on Airbnb. I eventually found this thing called Price Labs and gave that a go. And this was pretty much the extent of my knowledge about short-term rentals. It was Airbnb and Price Labs for a good few years. It went really well. The property sold great. It more than, it even made a profit, even though I wasn't too fussed about making a profit, to be honest with you. It was just about having a place to stay. And eventually it went up in value a bit, which allowed me to invest and buy another one. So I ended up with 2 short-term rentals. And previous to that, I was more interested in long-term rentals and buy-to-let and, different aspects of property investment. And while I've been doing my research, I'd found various platforms, but one that really struck a chord with me was a platform called Property Hub, and their focus is buy-to-let long-term rentals in the UK. They started a podcast in 2013, a website. I think they've done events. They've even had like an investment thing. They now have a column in the Sunday Times, and I saw what they'd built in the long-term rental industry. And when I ended up with a short-term rental, I thought to myself, where's my property hub now that I'm interested in holiday lets and running holiday lets? And there just wasn't one. And at the same time, I could see a lot of other hosts and property managers generally in Facebook groups, and they were asking the same questions over and over again. Oh, I've just got a property. How much do I charge? Should I charge a cleaning fee? Should I allow pets? All these things over and over again. I thought there really needs to be a platform to help people. So when the World Cup came to an end and I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, was I going to stay in Qatar or the Middle East, or maybe go and work on the next World Cup in the US, which is happening this summer, the US, Canada, and Mexico. But I had this idea, just kind of burning away inside of me. I thought there's something in this idea of building a media platform for short-term rental hosts and property managers like me. So once the World Cup finished, I got to work. I got to work on it and set it up myself.
I can't tell you how many guests on this podcast have had a more or less accidental entry into this industry, but then really enjoyed it when they discovered it. So it's definitely a theme. Um, Host Planet has now grown into a pretty major education and media platform for the industry. It sounds like you expected it to resonate, but has it been even a bit more than maybe you had expected?
Oh, interesting question. I think at the start, you obviously dream about where you think it might get to be, and yeah, I guess, do you know what? If you'd have told me, nearly 3 years ago, so 3 years ago was when I started seriously thinking about this platform. If you'd have told me then this is where you're going to be at the start of 2026, you're going to be hosting the Host Planet Roadshow across the UK, and these are all the partners you'll be working with, and you'll have done over 250 podcast episodes, and etc. etc. I'd have absolutely bitten your hand off. But like during the journey, especially at the start, it feels like a very slow process. I think when I see a lot of people in the industry, Host Planet, they'll say to me, "Oh my, you guys have blown up. It's kind of like overnight success." But it doesn't feel like overnight success in the first few weeks and months and the first year or so, when you're grinding and it's day by day. But I guess what I knew was that as a content and a media platform, week by week we would become more valuable, because every podcast episode that we publish, every ebook download we create, every blog, every event, every newsletter, the more content, the more helpful we are to people, the more that we help hosts and property managers take action to build better and more sustainable businesses. The bigger our ecosystem becomes, the more valuable we become to hosts and property managers, but also to industry partners as well. So I knew it was something that it was about being consistent and committed and turning up day by day and doing the basics well, and just continuing on that journey. So yeah, it's nice where we are now. Is it where I expected? I kind of, yeah, but at the same time, it's probably exceeded my expectations a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, this really resonates with me. I must say, like when you're starting a startup, the initial phase can feel really long, and I think a lot of people are maybe like a bit disappointed with the progress in the first 6 months. But then things compound and they really take a life of their own, and it sounds like that's what's happened here with Host Planet. And then you get this non-linear growth, and that makes it so much harder to see, where you can end up.
Yeah, very much so. I completely agree. It's the same, because I think when you're immersed in it day by day, it can feel slow, because it's a series of tiny little wins and then little defeats as well. And again, that's actually what I wasn't really prepared for at the start, is the constant roller coaster, the constant highs and lows. And I was really bad at dealing with really minor setbacks at the start. If somebody replied to me over LinkedIn and just said they weren't interested, I'd get really annoyed about that. Now it would be completely water off a duck's back. But I mean, back at the start, I wasn't prepared for all the constant ups and downs. It did feel like a roller coaster.
Yeah, if you have come to enjoy rejection, I can recommend fundraising. That's a great pastime. So you've obviously put out a ton of material, and I think it's fair to say that the industry is probably better educated now than it would have been before you started out. But where do you think we're still undereducated or perhaps misinformed?
I think there are a few issues. One thing that I saw early on in my journey, and especially when I was going to events in the STR space, and from what I could see in the content that was being created, is that everybody, a lot of, especially the tech companies, everybody's aiming their content at trying to get the enterprise level clients, 50, 100, 200 properties that they're managing. And that's a really, really small part of the industry.
Hmm.
Probably 80% of the industry is people with one or two properties. And that 80%, that might be a low number. It might actually be a little bit higher than that. So what I felt was that the vast majority of people involved in short-term rentals were being ignored really by a lot of the content that was being created. And that was one of the things where I thought, there really needs to be something to help the people like me. The people like me that've got two properties. I mean, Host Planet has definitely evolved into something where we try to be as broad as possible and create content, whatever the stage of your journey, whether you're starting out or whether you've got thousands of properties that you're managing. And I think we do that pretty well. We try to keep it as relevant and accessible as possible. But I think that's something that I saw in the industry generally. I just felt the audience, the target audience for a lot of content was really bad. It was either targeting at people with hundreds and hundreds of properties, or I felt a lot of the content was targeted at the industry rather than hosts and property managers. And I felt that's what a lot of companies and platforms were getting wrong, because that's not going to grow your business. You need to speak to the hosts and property managers if you want to grow your business. And that's where I felt Host Planet could really help.
Yeah, and it's such a difference running 100 property lets versus one or two that might even be your own. So I can see that. You now have podcasts, newsletters, events, and roadshows. How has the sort of content mix shifted over time? Has something changed in how people take in information, or is this more about finding more channels?
I think for us, part of my strategy from early on was I wanted to build an ecosystem that was capable of organizing events in the industry. And I always wanted to host events in parts of the country that, in the UK in particular, which really needed them to happen. Again, when it comes to the accessibility of content and education, it seemed to me that the vast majority of events are taking place in London. They're all aimed at enterprise level property managers. We're not actually getting out into the regions where short-term rentals play a massive role in local economies. Like in Cornwall, we just had our first Host Planet Roadshow event in Cornwall on the 5th of Feb. And I felt, again, there's a gap there. We need to get out. We need to promote this industry. We need to unite people, bring people together, and we need to tell our story. We've got to get better at promoting ourselves, because there are a lot of benefits of short-term rentals. We bring a massive amount to a lot of communities and a lot of economies, and we need to shout about it. We need people, we need politicians, we need the media, we need local people to understand the benefits we bring. And I feel that if we as an industry don't talk about the positives that we bring, nobody else is going to do it. The BBC aren't going to be knocking on our doors and saying, hey, let's talk about all the great things about short-term rentals. That's never going to happen. So we have to get out there on the front foot and do it. So in terms of like effective, going back to your question, like content platforms, I feel like events, in-person events, are the most impactful. Again, going back to Cornwall, we had over 100 hosts and property managers in the room. Vast array of people, from people who've got a few rentals up to the likes of people from Sykes Holiday Cottages and Travel Chapter, who their brands are managing thousands and thousands, and many other enterprise level property managers in between. And just the energy. I think having a format where we're encouraging conversations, we're encouraging what people can learn from one another, best practices, knowledge sharing, and then having to think about how we can together drive the industry forward. I think the reaction we had from that, like I said, the atmosphere in the room, it was really heartening, and it makes me feel like the industry's heading in the right direction. So yeah, to see that impact is really great. And in terms of digital platforms, I think we've put a lot of effort into video production and YouTube over the last year or so. And I think the biggest lesson for anybody creating content is that whatever the platform you're posting content on, you have to create content that platform wants to see. If you're going to have a YouTube channel, create the type of content that's going to work on YouTube, create proper thumbnails, titles, get your SEO right, get straight to the point with the podcast, all that kind of thing. Because, with organic reach these days is so low, you have to create the content which is really going to connect on those channels. If you don't, you're probably wasting your time a bit, and we have done. We've made mistakes on some platforms, including YouTube at the start, but we've started turning that around.
Yeah, I think the threshold to creating content is really, really coming down. So that makes it even more important to have a very high quality bar. I think pretty much anyone can run a podcast these days, or so they tell me.
Even us too, Niels. Yeah.
You work with a lot of the biggest brands in the industry as well. How do you maintain independence and trust in your audience while working closely with commercial partners?
I think everything has to revert back to the North Star of our business. And we are all about helping short-term rental hosts and property managers with education, which is helpful, actionable, and is going to help them build successful and more sustainable short-term rental businesses. So long as you're concentrated on that, and I think, what I always talk to our partners about is to sell without selling. The important thing here is to help people, is to help educate the industry, is to bring the industry forward. And if we've collaborated and created an ebook which has helped people, or a podcast series, or you've exhibited at one of our events, for example, and you've been involved in the content, then by helping people, then later on, when they might be looking for a new PMS or a new dynamic pricing software, whatever it might be, people like to do favors for people who have helped them. And I think it's that kind of mentality that we have. We want to create content that helps short-term rental house and property managers. And so long as our partners are completely aligned with that, then it should be a good fit.
Yeah, I think the incentives are actually probably more aligned than we think. Like, as for me, like as a vendor, or that perspective, you want the customer to come well informed, and you would rather actually they not become a customer if it's not the right fit. So you're actually quite incentivized to make sure that there is full transparency around the product. So I can see how that works well.
Yeah, I mean, full transparency around the product. Yeah, I mean, that obviously helps as well. But I think, so long as like any collaboration we do always moves back towards we're helping short-term rental house and property managers, and that's the focus, rather than we're going to produce content which is basically just a sales pitch. Nobody really wants that. We see this at our events as well. We say to the people, look, we want to share helpful, educational, actionable knowledge with the audience. Like at the roadshow, we said, look, you get a 10-minute knowledge burst, and it's not an opportunity to pitch. It's an opportunity to share something helpful with the audience. And that actually went down really well. We had people afterwards saying, it helped the flow of the day. It was 10 minutes and it was all helpful stuff. Nobody felt like it was death by PowerPoint. And frankly, so some of the events that I've been to are a bit death by PowerPoint, and we've hosted a couple of them. So I know what it's like.
You're also a holiday rental operator yourself, as we spoke about, and now you have a portfolio. So how does managing your own properties shape the content and the education you do through HostPlanet?
I think it's really vital. I mean, I think having skin in the game is so important. It helps me understand what hosts and property managers want to know about, because I'm either going through these things myself, or I've been through it, or it's something I might go through in future. So I think it's helped me massively. I mean, like I said, when I started out, I knew about Airbnb. Eventually I found out about this, dynamic pricing tool called Price Labs. But when I actually started planning for the business, my knowledge was very, very low. I mean, I thought I knew more about short-term rentals than I did. When I look back now, my level, my knowledge was absolutely was next to zero. But I had this misplaced confidence that I knew more than I did, and that I knew enough to set up this business. But I think I had enough knowledge that I could, interview people about short-term rentals, and at least do an impression of somebody who knew what they were talking about. And I think through running Host Planner, I've learned so much. I've met so many industry experts like you, of course, Niels, spoken to people who've been at the front end of this industry for a long, long time. And it's been wonderful. It's been a brilliant learning experience for me. But I think being a host, again, helps me to create the content which I know hosts and property managers are looking for, because if I was in their shoes, I'd definitely be subscribed to Host Planet, and this is the content that I'd want to listen to and read about.
Without a bit of misplaced confidence, I don't think there would be many companies started actually.
Yeah, probably true. I've thought about this quite a bit actually. I'm sure there needs to be studies about this into entrepreneurship. I'm sure the Germans will have a really long word for like misplaced confidence when you start a business. But yeah, my knowledge was zip, frankly. But yeah, but at the same time, I think it goes back to I'm a media person. That's my background. I've always said I'm Johnny come lately to short-term rentals, and where I've always felt I could make a difference is on the media side of things, because I could see the vision of what I had as a media platform for the STR space just didn't exist. So clearly, I felt there was a need for it, and I could see other stuff that was being created. I could see there were blogs, there were the newsletters here and there, there's some podcasts here and there, but a lot of them were created by short-term rental people who've been doing it for 20 years and obviously have a lot of knowledge to share, but they don't have the media background that I had. So that's where I felt I could make the difference. And I still see myself as I'm a media person, and I know a little bit more about short-term rentals these days, so I can I can make it stick better. But yeah, I think that's where I saw I could make the most difference, was on the media side of things.
Speaking about that background, like when you applied the craft, if you will, that you learned in sports and corporate communications to this sort of like small hospitality industry, um, what was different from what you expected?
Do you know what? Not a lot. Do you know what everything boils down to when you're creating content is knowing who your audience is and creating content accordingly. Being really, really clear. It's a little bit like direct bookings and being very, very clear about who your target guest is. And it's exactly the same when you're creating content. And with Host Planet, for example, everything has to be about short-term rentals. Everything has to revolve around, right, how are we helping short-term rental hosts, property managers, and industry professionals? Because if somebody suggests a podcast guest or a blog which is not related to that subject, is not related to our North Star as a business, then it's a waste of time and it can't go on our channel. So it's about creating the right content for your target audience. That's how you become a really valuable niche platform, and you can never sway from that. And it's just, frankly, it's the same whether you're creating content for a World Cup organizing committee or you're creating it for short-term rentals. It really is the same principles.
I think the same principles apply also in product development, actually. Like focus on the customer, decide who you're selling to, and keep making for them. Switching tacks a little bit, the industry is of course maturing very quickly. There is a lot of regulation coming in. There is consolidation happening where smaller operators merge or one acquire another. From your perspective, being quite plugged into maybe particular like the smaller segments in this industry, what are the biggest shifts happening right now?
AI. AI is changing the world. That's the biggest shift. But I think also, I think one of the reasons why House Planet has probably grown quite a lot is because the industry itself is changing everywhere. Regulation and tax has changed beyond recognition. I mean, in the UK over the last 5 years, we've had the abolishment, for example, of the furnished holiday let tax regime. And this has forced people, whether they are part-time hobbyist hosts, or whether they're doing this properly, to really start educating themselves and learning about the sector, and getting involved a bit more, perhaps with lobby groups like the STAA or PASC here in the UK, or the ASSC up in Scotland. So I think the big change is that people have kind of been forced into learning about what's happening in the industry and why changes are being made. And that's driving the industry forward. I think it's becoming more professional, it's becoming more mature. And then of course, now we have AI. Just I mean, I was thinking about last night, where things are going with AI and what it's going to mean for all our businesses. And oh goodness knows, it's a bit frightening.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and it's probably well timed with the sort of a harder business climate otherwise, like with higher interest rates and the regulations. But what are the most important things that smaller operators need to do to stay relevant and resilient in this environment?
I think you have to educate yourself. I mean, again, look, plug for Host Planet. I mean, you have to keep up with what's going on in the industry. Regulation is changing. It's changing all the time up and down the country. And sometimes it's on a particularly local and regional level. I think as a small operator, there's a lot of value in getting to know your own ecosystem around you, whether that's your competitors, whether it's local businesses. I think there's a massive opportunity if you're a local or a smaller operator. If you can attend events, learn from other people, network, and help yourself and ultimately help your business, you are going to be ahead of 99.9% of other people. So just by kind of immersing yourself in the industry and really taking the time to learn about what's happening and how you can run a better and more productive and more sustainable business, then you're going to be in front of the vast majority of other people. So I think, yeah, my message to anybody would be, you know, take a bit of time to educate yourself, listen to podcasts, go to events, because you'll have those light bulb moments. We in Cornwall, we had Robin Clifford from Guesty on stage, who's one of the best speakers in the industry. And he said, you might not go to an event because you're going to learn loads of stuff, or it's going to be like 8 hours and you're not going to have heard of any of it before. You go because of that, the 1% thing, that amazing light bulb moment where you're like, oh God, yeah, that's a great idea. That's something I can implement tomorrow. And I think, especially if you're a smaller operator, then you will experience those, and you'll probably get more than 1%. You might have like 5 or 6 light bulb moments during a day. So yeah, I think going out of the way to help yourself would be my best advice to smaller operators.
And looking ahead a bit, you mentioned AI, but of course there's a lot of things happening. What do you think people are not quite preparing for today?
Probably the way that searching for short-term rentals and searching for accommodation and travel is going to change completely in the very near future. I mean, at the moment we have very broad large language models. I imagine most people listening to this, they'll know about ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and the like. What I can see with travel specifically is an actual travel AI platform, a little bit like a ChatGPT, but it just takes care of travel specifically. And I think that's probably what people are unprepared for at the moment. And I think what a lot of operators need to do, and whether they're property management companies or STR businesses, is they need to really develop their online footprints, because old SEO is kind of out of the window. I mean, I kind of care a lot more about GEO at the moment than I do about traditional SEO. And I'm always thinking about how we can increase our footprint. What we're doing on YouTube, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we have our own website, we're getting cited by other websites. So again, I think for STR brands, being cited on news platforms, on educational platforms, this is only going to help, because the LLMs, they might find a reference to what you've said on YouTube or on a podcast or something like that, but they need other sources, verified sources, to back it up. So I think getting that web of online content right is going to be absolutely vital in the very near future, so that you're showing up on the LLMs. Because if you're not, your business, whatever it is, whether you're selling holidays, whether you're selling PMS, dynamic pricing tool, if you're invisible on there, then you're going to struggle.
So true. I think the last update we did to Minut.com was actually to make it more readable for LLMs, not for people. And I'm sure others are doing exactly the same.
Yeah, do you know what? A friend of mine, he sent a link to me the other day, and we were talking about the newspaper industry, and he said, "What on earth is this article all about?" And it was about gardening, but it had been written in a way where it was just answering questions about gardening, and it was about Alan Titchmarsh, and people in the UK will know who he is. He's a famous TV gardener, but the article was about spades and the different kind of tools you need. And I kind of had a quick glance at it, and I said, "That's just being written to get AI to crawl it," because it was all lists and it was all questions and all that kind of thing. And yeah, that's kind of where we're heading. Funny world, isn't it? You know, we're saying, yeah, let's produce articles that have loads of lists and questions, and then AI LLMs might find us.
Yeah, they definitely knew their audience with that article. So what you were saying around how distribution is changing and how search is changing, I think is super interesting, right? Like I myself, when I plan my travel now, I start with ChatGPT or Claude, and you build your itinerary and use it to find accommodation that is specifically suited to me and my family. But while doing that, it sort of feels like using AltaVista, if you remember that search engine. You know, you can sort of see that there is a seed there, but it's actually pretty difficult to get it perfectly right. You could imagine a future where an Airbnb or a Booking.com actually builds some similar models. I mean, for now, it's so expensive to train an LLM that it's actually out of reach for even the big companies, right? Like it is really down to a handful of companies worldwide that can do this. But scroll forward a couple of years, that's not going to be the case, and you will be able to do them a lot more specific. So do you think that this is the moment where the sort of competition between Google and our established OTAs is tipping towards like the Googles and the OpenAIs? So you're gonna get more distribution there, or do you think the people who will be building LLMs that are more specific to travel are actually going to create something that makes you continue go to Airbnb.com when you're searching for your accommodation?
Feel like we have to go backwards a little bit to go forwards. And I think if you look at Airbnb in particular, Booking.com and Uber to a certain extent, for a while they've wanted to be the all-encompassing travel platform. They want to be able to book your train to the airport, your flight, your accommodation, and your food deliveries in between if it's Uber. So I feel like that's where we'll go with a specific LLM, which is for travel. And the opportunity, I guess, for brands like Airbnb and Booking.com is they already have these massive footprints. So maybe now, with the democratization of technology, maybe now is the opportunity to deliver, the plans that they've had in recent years, and Airbnb can stop messing around with experiences and hiring a local yoga instructor. They can actually be this all-encompassing travel platform which does everything. And I guess, as consumers, that's what we want, because at the moment, like I'll go to ChatGPT and say, my family want to go here. If I did it a few weeks ago, we were planning to go to Vietnam while we're in the Philippines for a week. So it's like, right, we need this. It needs to be near the beach. It needs to be this many people, da-di-da-di-da. And at the moment, it's still quite cumbersome, because they give you a few links and a few examples, and you've still got to go direct to them and book that. And then you've got to go separately to book your flight. And then you've got to go separately and get to the airport and all the rest of it. So it's, I look at the way ChatGPT is affecting search, but it's by no means a perfect system. It's better than Google, but I'm still having to do the heavy lifting. So the opportunity is to take away the heavy lifting, to make it as seamless as possible. And yeah, if I was leading Airbnb and Booking.com, I'd be thinking, well, how do we build a platform that that delivers what we've always wanted to do.
Yeah,
So
there is of course like the discoverability element, like you're finding the accommodation, and then there is the actual booking, and there's a lot more to booking an accommodation than just pressing a button, right? Like there is insurance, there is guest screening, typically there is many layers of it, and I tend to agree. Like I think all of these things are not going to be part of the general model. So I think there is space for both, and I think we'll see interesting developments, but both will still be around.
yeah, I mean, I spoke recently to Shahar from Boom, and we're talking about agentic AI, and he was just saying, well, there's going to be a point where you have your AI assistant, and they'll just go and do it for you. And maybe that's the other side. Maybe that's what will happen. You will trust your AI assistant so much, they'll know you so well, they'll know exactly what you want. They've got the clear brief. They go away and do it. So that takes out the heavy lifting part of still having to actually go through to the websites and book it and try and get the best rate and all the rest of it. And yeah, I mean, we're still at the moment with like airline dynamic pricing, we're still in this, and I'm experiencing this right now. I tried to book some flights for £500 on AirAsia, but their website's so terrible, so I couldn't do it because it kept telling me that the price had finished. And now when I try to book like a month later, the flights have gone up to £800. So what do I do? Do I book now? Do I wait? We're still in this, trying to get Skyscanner alerts and all that kind of thing, or using a VPN to go to a country where it might be £10 cheaper. So yeah, we're still in a kind of it's still quite clunky, isn't it, at the moment, booking travel.
Wait another year, and I'm sure you can tell your agent to negotiate with the airline agent, and you'll come up with a price.
Maybe.
And if you were starting Host Planet again today, what would you do differently?
Well, when I first started it, I made two big errors. The biggest error was calling it Holiday Cottage Handbook. So we rebranded to House Planet about a year ago. Holiday Cottage Handbook was too long. It didn't make sense to a lot of people. It especially didn't make sense to people in America. So very soon after launching the business, I thought, well, we have a saying: you've lived in London long enough, you'll know what drop a bollock means. And I knew that I'd dropped a bollock, so I worked that out. And then the other thing was, I think when I first started the business, I felt that the content that we would be creating would be very much focused on the UK market. And then I very quickly realized that this is a global industry. America really is kind of the home of vacation rentals in many respects. It's where kind of it's the most innovative, and the industry's really been driven forward there. And so yeah, I think having a global focus, that was something that was easy to switch very early on. The name took a bit more time to sort out with the new brand and everything, but yeah, those were the two things that I would definitely do differently.
You landed really well, I think. Finally, and we always ask this of people on the podcast, what's the craziest or most unexpected story that you've experienced as a host?
As a host, oh gosh, it's a pretty awful one actually. It was quite recently. So I got a call from a guy saying, I've booked your place, and I haven't had the code for the door. And I said, okay, what's your name? I said, I've got to check like your name and that everything checks out. And he was giving me a name, and I said, well, that's not the name on the booking. I said, I can't give you the code. You haven't given me the right name. So then he comes back, calls me again, and I was getting so many calls from this guy, and eventually he managed to tell me what the name on the booking was. It's, oh yeah, my auntie booked it for me. Right, okay. Eventually gave me the name. I was like, right, okay, you've given me the right name, fine, da-di-da. And I think there ended up being a group of them. I don't know how many there were, but far too many. I mean, the house that I've got, that one, I think it sleeps 4, maybe 5 max if somebody, really wants to stay on the sofa. I think there was about 7 or 8 of them. They'd all come up from London or something, from a festival. They'd left a bit of damage. They'd been a bit noisy. It wasn't anything terrible. They didn't trash the house or anything like that, but it wasn't a great experience, and there was just something not quite right about it. Anyway, they'd left. It's fine. They'd gone. They'd left a little bit of damage on one of the kitchen tops. Didn't think too much of it after that. Then I get a call on the Monday from the actual, the person named on the booking, and she says, "Did somebody actually arrive at your house on these dates that were booked?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, this was my work credit card. I didn't book this. It wasn't me." So I was like, right, now suddenly this all kind of makes sense. So somehow, and this was through booking.com, somehow these guys had, I don't know, they'd flipping managed to hack in, they'd found a booking and ended up at my place. But it just shows you, it was quite a sobering experience. That's the craziest thing I can think of recently, apart from the funny things that people have left at the listing and those kind of stuff now and again. But yeah, that was a bit of a crazy weekend.
Yeah, I'm sure the auntie passed the guest screening with a bright green light.
Exactly. Yeah, she's literally like a middle-aged woman who works in an office. No. And it was. She said it had been booked through her business credit card, so all the emails and stuff had gone to her business email, and she'd only seen them when she got there on Monday morning. So this had happened on Friday night or something. So
very creative,
wasn't it just? Yeah.
Great story. Thank you so much for coming, James. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Nils. All the best. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to Minute by Minute. If today's episode gave you fresh insight, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Share this episode with your team and follow us on social media to continue the conversation and exchange your own operational stories. To learn more about privacy-first property protection, visit minut.com. Until next time, make every minute count to maintain your property's safety.